Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to hear me speak. It's a real privilege. It's my first time at this festival, and I've already met some incredible people. It's humbling to speak in your company, and it's a real privilege. And thank you very much to the organizer of the festival for having me. For those of you sat here looking at me thinking I'm in the wrong place, who am I looking at? Which, to be fair, could be all of you. My name is Jim Piercy. I am creative director of Wall Street Journal Custom Studios for EMEA and Asia. Before that, I was creative director at Bloomberg Media in London, where I set up their custom content model about 12 years ago. So I'm quite old. A team of designers, developers, project managers, marketing executives, unfortunately some salespeople as well, and I'm only saying that because one of them's there. The Custom Studios is the in-house creative team for the Wall Street Journal. We are responsible for turning commercial deals into content that our audience want to engage with. And advertisers pay to collaborate with us because we have a deeper understanding of our audience. And that's an audience that is qualified already because the Wall Street Journal works on a subscription model. Essentially, we make advertising. You will hear a lot of talk about content. We still see that very much as advertising. And we apply the standards that the Journal does to its journalism to our content work. Just briefly, the Wall Street Journal has been going for 125 years. For the last 29 years, it's voted the most trusted and reliable newspaper in America. They've the winner of 36 Pulitzer Awards. In the last 12 months, we've added 305,000 digital subscribers. We've actually never had more paying customers. And I think that speaks to the media landscape, particularly right now, that it speaks to the value of credible journalism, and we apply those standards and that rigor to our custom work. And we're talking primarily the digital space today. And I'm sure you're familiar with this sort of stuff, but it kind of looks like this. And we're very proud of it. We've been very well awarded for it. We've picked up close to 100 awards in the last 12 months from Webbies, Tellies, D&AD, Cannes Lion. But praise from your peers is one thing, and advertisers, I'm sure you know, like to award ourselves. But does it work for our audience? Does it work for our clients? And if it does, how? And how do we prove it? The hastily constructed / mostly stolen title of today is Fantastic Stories and Where to Find Them. And I'm just going to clarify what that means and how it fits into what we do. It's not recommendations for your summer reading list, although I do have some. If you want some, we can talk about that afterwards. When I talk about stories, what I'm really talking about is content, which I know is a huge buzzword and has been for a while in the industry. I'm talking about content or a series of content elements that together build a deeper engagement with a subject or a series of subjects, and by extension, a deeper engagement with a brand. For stories, you could call them campaigns, and we approach all our work as campaigns. And there's a few reasons for that, but essentially, we're not just responsible for making entertaining video or an engaging web UI or top quality journalism. We're also responsible for getting people to leave where they were and spend time with this content. We're gauged on how long people spend with this content. And it's really why it's hard, why great stories are important, is because it's hard to get people to leave somewhere where they chose to be and send them somewhere where they didn't. Now, there's a bit of a disclaimer here, because what I have to say is I don't really believe that there's too much science behind this, which might fly in the face of a few different presentations. I didn't study journalism, I didn't study advertising, I didn't study marketing. I went to a fairly liberal art college in London that was, to be honest, if I'd have said, I want to make an elephant out of paper mache, they probably would have let me do it if I'd have given them a reason. And I think I'm still a believer that the best advertising is about the genius of creative. It's not something that's been workshopped and focus grouped. It's not something that is ticking boxes on a client RFP. It's about a singular vision. And I think the sheer amount of data and feedback in the market right now can work against great content and great advertising. And it takes away surprise and it takes away excitement. Things like contextual targeting, which we use, by the way, and it can be incredibly useful, but how many times do you get served an ad, a Google ad for something that you just bought? Because it happens to me every single day. So whilst we absolutely don't discount the value of data, and in fact some of the stuff that we'll talk about is informed by data, I guess what I'm saying is I believe in the creative process more than I believe in numbers. And I say that as somebody who ultimately works for Dow Jones and their business is data, so they probably don't want to hear me say that. That said, I don't know how much time, or what the demographic of this room is, but how much time you spend with clients, and particularly agencies. I think it's fair to say they need a little bit more convincing than just some creative egotist like me telling them that the idea is great and I can't back it up. So how do we find fantastic stories? And how do we demonstrate that they're the right ones for a client? Well, we always start with an idea. And remember that we're looking for ideas, and we're not looking for formats, and we're not looking for themes. So things like a video series, or a content hub, or a long-form piece, or something about water or sustainability is not an idea. That's a delivery mechanism. That's a way to get your message out. They're boxes. They're no different to an MPU. So, but we have found some common threads throughout our most successful programs, and we've done hundreds of these now. And so I think what I'm going to do is explore what we think are the most important ones and what elements are needed for great content. So, is it magic? Is it science? So is it a data-informed backdrop that gives you the why, the where, and the who of how to make content? Or is it none of those, or is it a mix of both? We've analyzed our campaigns. I say we, I haven't. Somebody much cleverer than me did. And we put them into 3 buckets, which we are calling authentic stories. So these are content programs that speak to, they tell a truly organic, authentic story to a brand. Singular stories, which is storytelling that digs deep into a single topic, and true to platform stories, which is really about finding the voice of the environment where that content is going to live. So we'll start with authentic stories. Now, I think it's fair to say that all brands are looking for authenticity. I think it's also fair to say that it's rare that you see it and feel it to be sincere. I don't know if anybody fancies a Pepsi right now, but authenticity is intrinsically linked to a brand's DNA. It's about what they do. It's about how they act. It's about your touch points with that brand. In my days of making TV commercials, I lost count of the time that people would say, oh, we want to be like Apple. We want to look like Apple. And I'm sure they do. And it's a perfectly valid ambition. I mean, Apple are what, the biggest company by market cap, maybe? Or maybe that's Google now. But Apple aren't Apple because of their adverts. That forms part of that company. But it's about company philosophy, company culture, personality, product, etc., etc., etc. So brands have to be true to what they do. What I think is that brands need a license to talk about themselves in a certain way. And it sounds simple, and actually it is. But the important thing is to demonstrate to a brand that that's what their customers and potential customers want to see. An example of this type of storytelling is a campaign we put together for a company called MetLife. Now, MetLife is a huge insurance company, primarily life insurance company based in the States. And I don't have connectivity here, which is probably good because I can't laboriously scroll through all this stuff and bore you with it. But essentially, within MetLife, they have an arm of their company called the MetLife Foundation. It functions as their philanthropic arm. They've been going since the 70s. It's dedicated to financial inclusion, particularly in the developing world. This is something that they actually do. So through collaboration with them, and remember, the more contact we have with these companies, these customers, the better these campaigns always are. Through collaboration with them, they opened up their kind of program to us and showed us what we were doing. So we went looking for fantastic stories. So we went to Bangladesh. Now, in Bangladesh, 74% of people have a mobile phone, but only 31% of people have a bank account. And actually, further to that, they call it the last mile. The bricks and mortar banks don't really exist, and if they do, there is a difficult challenge to get there. If you're a small business owner, and by small business owner, by the way, we're talking about 1 person, 2 person, 3 people operations. For them to go to the bank, they have to close that business down for a day. So what they did is they worked with local mobile providers and developed an app that meant that these women could be given grants on their phones. And it was all women, by the way, because who'd have thought it? Men waste the money. So they only loan it to women. So it meant that we're not talking about life insurance. We're not talking about a company that's based in New York and is kind of faceless, and we know the MetLife Tower. We're talking about female empowerment, and we're talking about financial inclusion and lifting people from poverty. And it sounds kind of obvious, but I guess the most important thing is that that's actually what they are doing. Like, it's true. Like, it's not just a hashtag. It's not just aspirational. It's not them saying, "Oh, we want to look like we're doing some good. We want to be philanthropic." They're already doing it. It's absolutely linked to that company's DNA. Now, in fact, it's also an emotive story. So when we first showed this in New York, there was people genuinely with tears in their eyes, which I don't know that happens very often with advertising about insurance companies. So, but did it work? Well, yeah. To date, we've exceeded their goal for views of this Multipliers of Prosperity site by 80%. The scroll depth on the site is 80% above the Moat benchmark. But also, my team is not an agency of record for any one client. We work with brands throughout the year, but we work with them on a campaign-by-campaign basis. We're not on retainer. So we're also judged by whether they come back. And we're in our 3rd year of working with MetLife now, which I think is testimony to the work and the fact that it's working for them. Singular stories. How many people know Shane Meadows, the film director? Okay, a few. He's one of my favorite directors. He directed Dead Man's Shoes and A Room for Romeo Brass, which is maybe my favorite film ever. But I remember on a director's commentary, him talking about where he finds subjects for films. He was saying, "Oh, you don't need Hollywood budget And you don't need blockbuster ideas because there will be a film next door. Like literally, the old lady that lives next door to you will have a documentary in her, but you've just got to find it. And to sound super corny, that's true of brands as well. And in fact, in working with brands for nearly 20 years, I don't think I've ever worked with one who didn't have a good story to tell. Whether they wanted to tell that story is a different matter, and a lot of factors play into that. There'll be a sales strategy, there'll be a PR strategy, there will be a board, there'll be a marketing strategy, etc., etc. And all those factors go into what that brand wants to put out into the marketplace as their advertising message. But what I do know is that the most successful campaigns that I've ever worked on, I could boil down to a single sentence, if that, a tagline that explains everything about what that project is. And it's completely overused, but less really is more when you're trying to come up with these things. So our example for this is probably our most rewarded piece of work. It's a campaign that we did for Netflix called Cocainomics. Netflix came to us to promote, at the time, their new show that they hadn't launched, called Narcos. It was about Pablo Escobar. You've probably seen it. And they didn't give us very long. I think, in fact, we worked over a weekend to respond to this. But they came to us and said, we want to promote the show. What can you do? So we sat down, and actually, what we found was that this is not a story about cocaine. This is a story about business and politics, two things that Wall Street Journal does at least as well as anybody else, if not better. And that gave us our route in, and we asked ourselves, how would Pablo Escobar fare if he was the CEO of Google? And we thought, actually, he'd probably do pretty well, because he's a phenomenal businessman. So what we have now is not a story about Netflix. It's not a story about a TV show. It's a story about how a small group of smugglers in Medellin took an illicit trade and built it into a multi-billion-dollar industry that avoided law enforcement and the DEA for over 10 years. So we're telling one story. We're telling one story about this group, and we told that through long-form journalism. We had an investigative reporter write this for us. We had infographics that broke down the infrastructure of this distribution over the decades, and we went to Medellin, and we shot there, and we also had the DEA guys that are featured in the show. We interviewed the real ones, and we sat them down and we spoke about what they actually did, how they actually caught Pablo. And they gave us access to material that no one had ever seen. So we're not talking about Netflix. I mean, it helped that we had a catchy title, and it also helped that by moving your mouse on the landing page, you could rack up virtual lines of cocaine. Again, I don't know how much you work with agencies. That stuff tends to chime quite well. But it did work. I think the session time spent on Cocainomics is 30% above industry average. And crucially, 89% of people who saw it said they would subscribe. And Netflix don't tend to do content renewals. They work with a lot of different publishers, and they've done some amazing work with all of them. But they did renew with us for season 2. Now, the last bucket is true to platform stories. Authentic and singular stories, they're very much about the subject brand. But we have to remember context. You know, a piece designed for the Wall Street Journal doesn't necessarily work anywhere else. It might, but it might not. And that's fine, actually. That's kind of the point of native advertising, really. And all these other publisher brands have their point of difference, and they all have their personality. And we have to be able to translate those into content that works for their audience. So our latest campaign we're working on is for Star Alliance. It's their 20th anniversary. It's the world's first airline loyalty program. They have 28 partner airlines that they work with around the world. And this is a collaboration that we're working on with National Geographic. It's still work in progress, actually. We've released 2 of the films, and there's 3 to come later in the year. But the starting point for this is some of that research that I don't normally like, but I liked this bit, so I used it, which was that the wider you travel, the more successful you are, that there is a direct correlation between people who are well-traveled and business success. So from there, we're able to build from that a story about what it means to visit more places around the world, how you interact with different cultures, and came up with this idea of cultural connections. There's a lot in the full campaign, and they're actually giving away like 2 million air miles or something. But what our role was to create 5 films. So we challenge a writer to have a cultural first and step out of his comfort zone. So, for example, in Thailand, we take him to Bangkok for 48 hours, teach him Muay Thai, and he has to fight a local at the end of it. He got battered, actually, but it was fine. We went to the Arctic, where he had to learn how to ride a dog sled, build an igloo, and stay in that overnight, which was actually much easier than the Thai boxing. But when I wrote those films, I was aware that even though we are going to promote them on the Wall Street Journal, they're not going to live on the Wall Street Journal. They're going to live on StarAlliance.com and NatGeo.com. And those are very different places. So the cultural connections films are tonally different because they're in a different environment. Now, there is some crossover, of course, but what people expect from Nat Geo video, for example, is not the same as what they'd expect from Wall Street Journal. And we had to understand all those brand values to create work that resonated with all those audiences. We had to find common ground and the truth in both of those platforms. And the commonality that we found is that on all these platforms, and the customers for Star Alliance, National Geographic, and Wall Street Journal are incredibly well-traveled, be that business, leisure, both, but that they're always looking for something else. They're always looking for something new. They're always looking for more. So from our cultural connection starting point, we can build detail into that. The detail being that the basis for the films were the 5 centers of the founding members of Star Alliance. And the host we cast to front the films brings a kind of natural levity and humor that is familiar to the National Geographic audience. Tone of voice is absolutely key, and you have to be able to match that to an environment. We produced a piece last year that was a virtual reality, that's virtual reality, by the way, international symbol for virtual reality, a virtual reality roller coaster of the NASDAQ. It is actually quite interesting, but it's not going to play very well if you put it on Noisy or Vice. And a piece we've done for, by contrast, a piece we've just done for United Airlines for their new business class seat, that sounds super boring, and nobody really wants to read about that. So we had an idea about the future of sleep. That what does the future of sleep look like? And if you're talking to the audience that does the most business travel in the world, then how they sleep and how they get energy and how that figures into their wellness, it chimes absolutely perfectly with them. Can we prove that that works and our content approach works? Well, 80% of Wall Street Journal readers rate the commercial content as excellent. And the commercial work generates 20% more recall than display for us. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these things have some commonality, and they do absolutely bleed into one another. But we do have some universal learnings, which are be useful. It's probably the same for you, but how many times in a day do I have a brand imploring me to watch our brand ad? Come and see this film. And they don't tell me why. And I love advertising. I've always loved advertising. I actively engage in advertising. And I'm not going to go and watch your brand ad just because you've told me to. So be useful. Give people a reason to engage with your content. Be entertaining. And by that, you don't have to have videos of cats falling out of kitchen cupboards. That's fine, but you don't have to. Hopefully, I've shown that you can make entertaining work about anything. Don't reinvent a client website. There's a temptation, especially in content, that more is more. And it's not. And clients and customers and brands have huge amounts of content themselves. In fact, more and more brands are becoming their own publishers. So they already have this. Content is about finding something that your audience is interested in and engaging that customer deeper with that brand. Work with good people. Everyone that works in my team is much better than I am. There's no magic formula for it. So I'm sorry if you came thinking this was a how-to guide. If only it was, because then it would make my job a lot easier. But if you think you have found the perfect story for a brand, then be honest, be brave, and make sure that that is the story that you tell. And I've probably spoke quite quickly there. So I think we have some time for questions, if there are any. And if not, you can grab me at any point later on. Thank you very much. Oh, there's one. I can't guarantee I can answer any of these questions, by the way. Oh, it's gone. That's fine. Well, that was easy. Oh, there's one. Hello.
Hello? Now it works. Hi, thanks for the presentation. My name is Sabina.
Hi.
Just out of curiosity, how many brand requests do you get on average? I can imagine that you get a lot of people approaching you on, like, this is the newest idea, write a story.
Yeah, we get, actually, I'm now going to bring in the salesman that I said I didn't like, but how many RFPs do we get a week? 10 a week, roughly? In varying degrees, from $1 million plus to $50,000.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can now.
Hi, I'm Caroline. And last year I had the chance to spend some time at the New York Times T-Brand studio.
They're great.
And I'm actually working on my master thesis now about branded content. Does it work? Yeah. So I'm writing about branded content, and my question is, do you ever get the question from your clients when it comes to labeling and disclosure? Because there's a growing body of research that actually branded content works so well because many people don't recognize it as being an ad. So there's kind of a dilemma, because on the one hand, you want to be open and say that it's paid for content, but on the other hand, it usually performs worse as soon as people recognize it as advertising. So do you ever get questions like that? And
I think
what's
it's
your
a
take
good
on
question. I think it's a really relevant question. What I do think genuinely is that that line between what we would call kind of advertorial or sponsored content has blurred hugely, even over the last 12 months. I think, for me, and my own experience too, so part of this I appreciate is anecdotal, but I think people will spend time with content that's good. That who's paid for that content is less important if it's good.
I agree up to a certain point, but it's just that there are a couple of studies that show that people sometimes feel deceived, especially if they only see that as an advertising at the end of the article.
Yeah,
so
well, I
there's
think
a big discussion on also where to place it, right? The label.
I think that's true too. From our perspective, we're very clear. Everything is labelled paid program on native units, on ad units, at the top of each section. So there is never any doubt that it is paid for by an advertiser. In fact, when I joined the journal, the work that the content team was doing was much more advertorial in nature. Like what we do now is, we're looking to create custom bespoke experiences around a subject for a brand. They look nothing like what the Wall Street Journal looks like. So there is we're not trying to trick anybody. We're very open about that. And I think actually the best people like T-Brand, The Atlantic, Court, they're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes either. They make great content and people will consume it because it's great content, not because, or they won't not consume it because it's paid for. I think that's it. Oh, hey.
G'day, just one last question, I guess. I constantly pushing clients with these ideas and they love it at the start and then they seem to change what the message is, and by the time you get to actually shooting it, it's changed dramatically from what you believe is the heart of this story. Is there a way that you can secure that heart up front and make sure your client believes it right through pre-production to the end of production?
Sadly, I don't know whether there is. I think the best work also depends on a client sharing that vision and empowering you as the content creator to do your job in the best way. But I think we have to be aware that we're in a commercial transaction, that if I wanted to just make something that I think is good, then I can go and be an artist and maybe make money, but maybe not. And appreciate that not every time you're going to make the piece that you think it should be. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes, actually, better work comes out of that. But I appreciate the frustration, and we have it daily, by the way, that what you think and consider to be the best piece of work is not necessarily that all the people in that chain do. I don't know whether there's going to be an easy answer for that. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you very much.